Greetings, fellow future fossils. Michael Garfield here. Co-host Evan Snyder is falling through a mountain fighting the Balrog or something, and we'll be back on the show in a few episodes' time. But in the meantime, we have another fabulous conversation from Boom Festival in Portugal. This episode is with Mark Lee, aka Somnio8, one of my absolute favorite visionary painters, an incredible artist, both in analog and digital media. And you can find all of his stuff at Somnio8, that's SOMNIO, numeral 8.com. But this first in-the-person conversation that I've had with Mark took a completely different path down the rabbit hole of alternative physics and this parallel history of suppressed world-changing technologies. Not at all what I was expecting, and certainly an invitation to investigate some of these really provocative claims and fascinating avenues of inquiry that Mark brings up in this chat. And of course, one of the things about the future is its complete unpredictability and how that which we once laughed at and imagined to be impossible or ridiculous becomes true, becomes commonplace and matter of fact. So this conversation offered me, as I hope it offers you, a fantastic invitation to challenge my own assumptions and beliefs and to actually get online and look up some of this stuff and look up the fabulous history of the inventors and the theories and devices raised in this conversation, which took place in the Museum of Visionary Art at Boom Festival. A wonderful venue for imagining the horizons of human potential, but also rather noisy. You'll be hearing the soundtrack to Samskara, the Android Jones and Tipper planetarium show, which was playing inside the art gallery throughout the day. And that underlies and scores our conversation at times very synchronistically and beautifully. At other times, things get a little difficult to understand because of the background noise, for which I apologize, but we have to catch the inspiration and the magic where we can. And often these beautiful conversations that occur in the container of the festival environment are lubricated by all of the noise and hubbub. So kick back, enjoy. It's a short episode this week, but we've got a lot of cool ones coming out. We're glad to be finally on a regular schedule with this show. Before we begin, just a reminder to subscribe to Future Fossils podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Rate us, review us. It helps get this podcast into the ears of other people who will enjoy it. Lastly, a heads up that I am writing a book called How to Live in the Future, a combination of evolutionary biology and psychedelic futurism. It should appeal to any of the listeners of this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about that and get your name in the acknowledgments, then you can find out more at patreon.com/Michael Garfield. And with that, everyone, tune the quasi-crystalline antenna of your DNA to our wonderful guest, Mark Lee. Well, hello, everybody. This is Michael Garfield doing the Future Fossils on the Road special Boom Festival edition, and I am here with Mark Lee, visionary artist here at Boom Festival. Super excited to have you on the quote-unquote show, man. Tell people a little bit about who you are and your story.
Okay, I grew up in Wales, pretty mundane kind of existence. I went into the video game world after studying animation. And then I kind of had a moment of what the fuck am I doing with my life? Working in London. I had a moment where I missed my train one morning, and that was the morning of the London Underground bomb. So I slept late and woke up to a deserted city basically, and a week or two later I was like, I need to get out of here. So I went on a pilgrimage to Burning Man and Peru and do ayahuasca and the usual, spiritual pilgrimage thing. And along the way I met a group of beatboxing puppeteers where they kidnapped me for 4 years. And
The Fungineers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I lived with them for 4 years, and they introduced me to the visionary art scene and just the global festival culture, which was very amazing. It was very refreshing to know there exists the tribe, global tribe. And so yeah, hang out with those for a while. And then they took me to Bali one year to do some just animation, and I just fell in love with Bali. And then after that I moved there, and after that just all these things started opening up, all these opportunities, meeting all these people like scientists and engineers and architects and just different kinds of thinking. Big gap of just sinking into Bali and finding who I am, and a mixture of doing painting and exploring virtual reality and augmented reality. And then I met a guy from California, Casey James, who's my best brother. Then he has a company in China where he's making domes and pyramids and aquaponic systems. And so I kind of spent half my year with him, and we kind of work as like engineering and kind of new kinds of systems. And so that's kind of where I'm heading now. And then also in Bali you meet crazy scientists and people that are playing with radionics and kind of over unity technologies and things. So
I got to stop you there. Tell us, because I know that radionics and over unity stuff is an area I'm super fascinated in, but I honestly don't know much about the modern state of those technologies and like what people are doing with it right now.
Right. So the technology is based on a kind of kinesiological response to the unconscious or the superconscious. And so this technology is basically a set of dials, and it was invented in the 1890s, I think, and then the FDA closed it down, made it illegal, but there was a bunch of people who kept going with it, and most of them are dead now because they're all old people. But the one guy who I work with right now, Don Paris, he was gifted the patent of this one scientist, inventor, who had many different aliases because he was being kind of hunted down basically. And so when he died, he was found with a gun in his left hand, shot his brains out, but he was actually right-handed, which suggests some interesting things.
Foul play, yeah.
And so he gave all this technology. His wife gave the technology to this guy Don that I work with, and so we started working together. And this was the last thing he created before he died. Well, he created the chipset. He created the microchip, which is radionics is basically based on a scalar kind of idea of two pancake coils very close together, and when you put a high frequency signal, like a sweep signal through there, it collapses the field, and in that collapse there's some kind of phenomenon where it goes up a dimension or back in time or something.
So is this related to the Casimir Effect? There's like that slight attraction between really plates that are held really closely, and
like the idea of gravity and all these things. There's some unknown science that they were tweaking on. And so this one device that he's doing now, so he's taking it, this guy Don, he's taking it to the next level. So the technology is basically a box with dials, and under there's a stick plate, which is like a rubber film, and under the rubber film is a bunch of coils. And what happens is you tune into the idea of the target, which could be a hair sample or a photograph, Polaroid photograph, because it's got a holographic crystalline structure, and you can tune into the idea of the information field of the target. And what happens is, as you reach the tuning of it, you feel a distinct gravity pocket, and it just finger stops sliding around. It's like, whoa, stuck. So that's basically then how, like, kinesiologically, your body is tuning the intelligence beyond your conscious mind of this idea of a superconsciousness is tuning into the superluminal idea idea of the target. And so the new technology now, he's implementing LEDs, so you can actually see when you hit the gravity pocket, and it's like a more of a refined feedback mechanism. Back in the day, when they first invented it, they used a glass rod onto this technology, and it was a glass rod made slider of the patient's stomach, and with it they could diagnose cancers and tumors and illness within the patient. And it goes back even further, the history of the guy who discovered it, this German genius kid who found this phenomena where when he was doing these tests with percussion, where he would hit the patient's stomach, he would find that when they were facing, I think it was east, it was much more stronger in effect, and it broadened his perspective on what was actually going on in terms of, you know, the whole system of this planet and the magnetic fields and the body, and then so they started to refine then the technology of radionics, and sadly the FDA, I think the Rockefellers or some rich family found out about it, and because it was opposed to the pharmaceutical industry, they made it illegal. If you were found even mentioning the word radionics, you got put in jail for like 20-30 years. That's where a lot of these scientists ended up in the streets, sort of sad life, like Wilhelm Reich.
So this sounds like a technology that is providing hard evidence of some sort of like non-duality of mind and physics, right? Because there's there's like the idea has a gravitational effect, and then there's an informational. So the question is, I guess for me, what the hell are you doing involved in this conversation? Like, I mean, I've known of your work for years, and you're a fantastic artist, but it's like one of those questions of like, I don't see, you know, Mark Lee radionics apprentice or whatever in the. So how's that mixed in with the rest of your life?
Well, it's all about shape, really. I'm obsessed with shape, the power of shape to direct the ether, and the idea of the ether is another conversation. But
yeah, another thing that was the Michaelson-Morley Experiment disproved the idea of a solid ether, like a luminiferous ether through which photons travel. But it was before we understood that there's a fourth state, the superfluid state, and that's the actual state of ether. So they disproved something that doesn't exist, but not the actual ether. And there's been that. Just as a point of reference for listeners, like most of 20th century physics is based on a misinterpretation of the results of that experiment.
Yeah, it was a real basic experiment that they did that didn't really prove the non-existent ether. Just
proved it's not a solid block, which it obviously isn't because we're moving around in it.
They were looking for some kind of drag or something. But then there was tests, and you know, later on that there is the ether, and so if you can tap into the ether, then you can extract, you know, energy and play with gravity and healing devices and frequency. It's like it's really exciting.
So did you get here with an over Unity engine?
No.
Did you ride like some sort of ornithopter bicycle over Unity device to Boom Festival?
Well, with my body.
That's okay. So does this stuff? That's an interesting kind of avenue. How has this knowledge affected the relationship to your own like physical incarnation?
Well, it just propelled my interest and inspiration to a much higher holistic level, where I'm so excited by this exploration. You know, again, because it's based on shape, you know, and the idea of now we can 3D model, 3D print, and cast in different materials. So we can start to play with these, you know, these Fibonacci frequency ratios and relationships. And we can really go in and tune these things to a level we couldn't do before. And so on a shape level, there's a really good YouTube video called Shape Power by Dan Davidson, and that's a really good general overview of the kind of principles that we're talking about here. Like, he discovered early on that you could take a bunch of chopsticks, wooden chopsticks, put them into a polystyrene ball going into a point, and he created this really sensitive gravity kind of meter. and he discovered that he was actually generating electrical gravitational field from using wooden chopsticks. And from this, then it just spurred on all his research into the power of shape. And in the video, he says amazing things about like making stuff fly and like healing and again. So as an artist, the idea of studying shape and material properties and how we can mix those up at this time and age, I don't need a background in engineering so much, but if I have the ability to virtually engineer anything I can imagine with these principles in mind, then we can start to really cross the bridge between art and technology in a really exciting way.
So what is this device that you're holding here?
So this is
Can I take a picture of this?
Yeah.
So we can.
This is one of the first prototypes of the Chio 2. So the guy came to me, he gave me the chipset, and he said, "Can you put a nicer case on it?" So within the case, we started to also develop, Wilhelm Reich's concept of orgonite and 5 metals and tensor rings and shape power, the Sri Yantra and the effect that has on agricultural things and so this is the magic here. This is the double antenna coil.
Okay.
So that's kind of where the magic is. And then this is a piezoelectric speaker and a LED. So that's the extra vectors in which it travels through. So yeah, the inventor, towards the end of his life, I think he was researching the Lilly wave in America, where John Lilly, he discovered this carrier wave in which you could put information. And I think he was maybe working with some secret government at some stage, and I think they took it and then started messing with it, putting weird mind control things. This is the story I've heard.
Right.
And so towards the end of his life, I think he was playing with that. And so on one hand, I'm sad, but the people I work with, it's like, this protects you against Wi-Fi. But the things that I know from what I know about this technology is that it was protecting me against mind control. He was which is, I know, is world famous, and I don't want to bring it.
It's a tinfoil pocket watch.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a beautiful little thing.
Yeah.
It looks a lot like the schematics that I drew in high school for the time machine.
Yeah, right.
That I was writing a novel, a time travel novel, in which me and my 2 friends wrote ourselves into the novel like you do when you're a teenager, and then like their future selves come back and bestow this responsibility of this device that has no origin, because it's like in one of those time loops where nobody invented it, because he hands it to himself and then he goes back in time and hands it to himself. But the drawings were of this like super complex but organic looking bauble.
Nice.
And so that's one of those things where it's like, you talk about carrier waves and like what kind of information is just sort of floating out there accessible to us.
Yeah, right.
So you're getting into engineering then now?
Yeah, virtual engineering I like to see it. I really want to inspire more artists to take up playing with 3D and using games engines, because it's the ultimate tool for sharing any idea we can imagine. And the technology now is getting to a point where we can start to do these things much more instantly, rather than having to go through elaborate processes of technology, modeling. Now we can just go straight into like smooshing light around in the screen and then 3D print it and cast it.
I've been amazed at all the things I've seen going on with like ZBrush and Cinema 4D and this stuff, but it irritates the shit out of me that we're still limited to these very basic interfaces in terms of having to use a 2-dimensional set of controls to create 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional objects. And it's like, I'm really excited about what's going on this year, because this is really the year where we seem to have hit critical mass with gestural interface. And that we're like, you got stuff like the Microsoft HoloLens now, and to like a lesser extent like the Vive.
Yeah, the Vive. I think that's going to be the future, these 3D control systems.
It's really important to be able to like use my hands and sculpt something in that virtual space.
Yeah.
But because if we're really going to be like in there working on it all the time, then I want to be in there with my whole body. I don't want to just be like
reaching around,
using a mouse and a keyboard. What
Yeah,
so,
I'm really excited about that.
So what other kind of what are some of the projects?
So the pyramid project we're doing right now in Bali. So that's being built right now, so it's being finished. And I kind of miss being there because I was gonna create the capstone and stuff, but I'll do it when I get back. Other projects. The New Earth project. Have you did the New Earth project? It's a long story, but this guy Sasha Stone, he was like this crazy studium rock star, and he quit all of it behind to go and do like a humanitarian work. So he went into the EU and created Example Zero, which was a free energy technology platform to protect scientists, and he created another one, which was Humanitat, which was more of a political kind of thing. And so he's in Bali, and he's kind of a person that all these interesting people kind of circle around, because there's it's based on politics and technology and all these things. So they're going to do a festival next year, and so I'm helping do all the kind of, I wouldn't call it branding, but the concept, and so like we were talking about this time traveling device, so I'm going to play with the idea of the hourglass. So instead of buying a ticket, you buy this little USB device, and it's all kind of designed in an artistic way to represent, like a little hourglass with a single grain of sand inside it. This represents like stardust, or our sovereignty, or the idea that you own this piece of land, which is a single grain of sand. And I just fallen in love with the idea, and then creating a portal at the festival ground, and then when you go into the festival, the idea that you're outside of time, and then from there we can invite amazing speakers like Dan Winter.
Oh, I love Dan Winter.
We're gonna try and get all those guys. I'd love to get John Hutchinson over there. He's a bit bonkers.
I was familiar with him. For those who don't know, Dan Winter's goldenmean.info is a fabulous informational resource on the relationship between, like, his special interest is in phase conjugate fields. It's this like scalar, fractal waves that generate these emergent patterns, and the interactions between those patterns and the health of the human organism. And he's managed to connect it really skillfully and playfully, and with a kind of a weird nerd sense of humor to all of this esoteric, John Dee's Enochian alphabet, and all this ancient
the
weirdness.
Electrical engineering, and how it's like the electrical engineering is the language to describe energetic and plasmatic fields and things.
You are in the place for that. I mean, you're in this land of like ancient temple complexes and stuff, and like so much of Dan's work hinges or pivots around demonstrating how these ancient temples were actually designed mathematically to facilitate the transcendental states of consciousness. So you probably, I can imagine that being there is just like it is something else entirely.
Yeah, it really is. It's so inspiring. Yeah, I've got my friend then who works for the New Earth project. He's Juan, and he's the architect, and he has inspired me a lot because he's all about the bioarchitecture. About if you build a building, if you can't grow a seed in there, then it's a kind of a destructive kind of a container, and so.
Like the resonances of certain buildings inhibit materials. Seed germination.
That's right. Yeah. And it's interesting because with this China project with Casey, so he's researching new materials and just kind of prefabricated systems. And so it's great to have these two opposite sides to then come together as buddies, and we kind of try and think about new ways of like creating like basalt piping and just different kind of materials. And then again, this to do with the New Earth project, another friend, Frederick, he's an electrical engineer. He's so inspiring because he's been involved with kind of free energy and all these technologies, hydrogen, for like 20 years, and he was was kind of like the liaison in Example Zero to go out into the world and find all these inventors and see what they got and see how applicable it is to, you know, to do it, to release these technologies.
Well, this is super exciting. I'm gonna want to really stay in touch with you and all these people and you know.
To Bali.
When is this? What is this festival and when is it?
Next April. I think it's going to be called Ancient Futures.
Oh, great! That's my jam. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's going to be really good.
So, I mean, we can go because I'm not here with my co-host, who normally keeps me a little on the leash. You know, as an engineer in New York, and he's a very rigorous critical thinker. So we try to stay away from woo-woo shit a little bit.
Yeah.
But I am super fascinated, especially in light of the recent geological evidence that there was this massive comet impact 13,000 years ago. Have you heard about this?
I mean, I have an idea.
So, over the last few years, there have been a couple of peer-reviewed papers in really prestigious geological publications on the layers of nanodiamonds that have been deposited by a comet that hit the North American continent, the North American glacier, 13,000 years ago, and evaporated the glacier, and may have been the historical event that led to this global story of a flood. I mean, because if you look back, a lot of these ancient temple complexes are now just off the shore because the sea levels were 400 feet lower with that glacier in place. So there's actually this mounting argument that all of this Atlantis mythology and all this lost civilization stuff is real. We're actually finding the evidence for it. And so this whole ancient future thing is really poignant now because, you know, as we're stepping into a future where the internet has sort of devoured the world, they talk about software eating the economy. And the funny thing about this march into the future is that by connecting everything to everything else, we are paradoxically reviving all of this ancient wisdom, indigenous knowledge, animism in the form of relating to the intelligence of our machines, and I wonder just how much of this is going to end up literalizing these supposed new age mythologies about these technologically sophisticated ancient cultures, and what's your stance on all of that? I mean, is it even relevant? I mean, you certainly don't need to believe in Atlantis to believe in the physics of this stuff,
right?
But it is compelling.
I mean, I feel it's true. I have inner experiences that suggest that it was real, that we were there, and I was thinking about it.
Yeah, well, that's fine. We can always get back to that.
Yeah.
So, in light of all of this stuff, I'm sure you have a vision of what kind of future we're actually going to be living in.
Yeah.
And what does that look like to you? I mean, in the near term. Let's start in the next 10, 15 years. What do you think?
Well, this festival culture is I see. If we can start to do this on a permanent level, and a sustainable level, with infrastructure, I'd like to see that we start to build these things permanent with giant 3D printers, and magnesium oxide cements, geopolymers, and then these over Unity technologies. It's not that complicated apparently. It's about tuning high frequency coils to these vortexes, and if we can do that, if we can get the energy, then we can do anything. If we got the energy, we can desalinate seawater, we can repopulate deserts and turn them into jungle, and so I'm really optimistic. I mean, I've seen it, I've met these people.
Have you held an over Unity device?
I've held the precursor to them.
Yeah.
It's pancake coils.
Interesting.
And the signal generator pieces. It's actually the radionics technology. So this one guy, which I shouldn't mention, but so he bought a bunch of radionics experimental kits from, I can't remember the website. But it was basically being able to. It was like an experimental kit where you could send wireless information, like mobile phones, through scalar antennas, like Tesla pilots almost, from one point to the other instantaneously without any difference if you were on the other side of the planet. So you could buy these kits and just play with them. And so this one guy, he took a bunch of them, and in playing with them, he looked at the output of some device thing, and he saw over unity, and so he started playing with it. He's been running his house for a year, I think.
Interesting.
It's like a suitcase-sized thing, just 2 pancake coils, signal generator, tuning it to the specific wave, where one wave rides the other, and just so again, the energy comes, and then from the same technology as well, high frequency, putting high frequency, high voltage through particular shapes would create also anti-gravity phenomena too.
There's that guy, the Iranian nuclear physicist M.T. Keshe.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's been working on something like that.
Yeah, I've been following his stuff for a while. It's hard because I'll go down rabbit holes for weeks of listening to his talks.
And then where's the proof?
Yeah, and the people at the Newest, they went to talk with him too, and he was a bit arrogant and it was unclear what he was trying to do. But I've built a bunch of things like nano-coated coils and made some nanomaterials, and I made LEDs light up with just some seawater and some wires, and that was pretty exciting. But it got to a point where I was like, okay, now what? I was this usable, and I'm kind of put it on a shelf for a moment, waiting to see what they come up with.
So I had this idea last night with respect to your optimism for the future, because I actually, I've been kind of fell off in the last few years with my research, but I've been fascinated by this stuff since I was in high school, because I had a friend her father was the guy that introduced me to every conspiracy theory, and one of them was Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden and his motionless electromagnetic generator.
Tom Bearden, he's one of the pioneers of radionics.
Yeah. So I did a report on that for my high school speech class.
That's
on Tom Bearden's work.
How did they react?
Oh, they were, fascinated but skeptical, as you would expect.
Yeah.
But in recent years, I've been thinking about it a little differently, because I've been, as part of my own kind of practice of cultivating my compassion and recognizing that the shift in consciousness that we need in order to move forward into a healthy planetary culture is one in which no one is left behind, no one is marginalized, because there's no center and periphery anymore. It's like every node is the center, so it can't be the developed world versus the undeveloped world, or the elite versus the masses. And so it actually concerned me a little that the Occupy movement defined itself as the 99% against the 1%. When the 1% are holding 40% of the wealth, you would expect, it's like, don't we want to recruit these people? Don't we want to heal the rift between these camps? Don't we want a solution that works for 100%? And so I started trying to take the position of these power elites, to take the position of these people that don't want things to change. And one of the thought experiments that I had was that, what if the reason that the over unity technologies and this radionics and stuff has been suppressed is because not merely because we're concerned about maintaining a big oil monopoly or whatever, but that somebody up there is well researched and kind of wise enough to know that we are not ready as a civilization, that if we were at this point in history to put what is essentially almost like a godlike technology in the hands of your average person, we would what would we do with it? A lot of people would probably just use it to accelerate the unsustainable consumption and mass production of waste goods, and like creating super weapons and all sorts of horrible things. And so I mean, it seems like there's always the dialectic of history, and like I can't, part of my thing is I can't get over somebody I don't hear anyone talking about is. You hear about this stuff with artificial intelligence. For example, people saying we need to assemble advisory boards and panels to discuss how we're going to make sure that this stuff doesn't destroy us. But I don't hear anybody talking about that with like free energy. Like what are we like? How are we going to prepare ourselves culturally for such a profound paradigm shift?
Yeah, it's huge. Especially the anti-gravity stuff, because that would, passports, borders would all become irrelevant because we can just go anywhere. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. I kind of tend, because I'm in Bali, I'm in a bubble. I'm surrounded by these things, and it's kind of like a field there. It's very open to imagine and to create. But yeah, when I do go back into the rest of the world, like when I go back home to Wales, just see the people and the state of consciousness. Yeah, it's hard to think, are these people ready, and what would they do with it, and what would happen if nobody needed to work anymore, and it would. And that's the term of a disruptive technology, then, and it is true. But for me personally, I'm obsessed.
It's worth the disruption.
Yeah. I'm not going to waste another lifetime be flying a spaceship.
Yeah. I mean, I have this thing about why, people buy a car, they buy a house, it's like, why can't that be one thing?
Right.
Why can't we live in the vehicle?
Right.
Why can't the vehicle just...
You ever heard of Ralph Ring?
No.
So Ralph Ring he worked with this guy Otis T. Carr. Otis T. Carr was like a student of Nikola Tesla, and Otis T. Carr was building disc spaceships in the 1950s, and he had a patent on it, and you can see these patents for these amusement devices that you get to think around it. But this Ralph Ring guy, he does his kind of thing of creating floating homes. Look it up, Ralph Ring on YouTube, and he's such a sweet, genuine old man, and his story of the experiences he had with these spaceships, of like the locality of space and time, and how such a good story. Ralph Ring, Otis T. Carr.
How do you spell that?
Otis T. Carr. I think it's T and then Carr with 2 R's.
Carr.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's great. But yeah, we've had this technology for, since the Vril Society, back, I think it was the 1920s or something, they were doing it, and the idea of breakaway civilizations and secret space programs, and so this technology, we think about UFOs and aliens coming down, but it's not. These were humans, and this stuff has been, the Vimanas, ancient history.
If we want to go like way out on a limb, I kind of wonder, I have this suspicion that we did actually fake the moon landing footage, but it's because we went to the moon
and we saw some,
and that there was already an established base there of some kind.
Apparently.
Yeah.
From a book I just read on secret space programs, there's like 6 of them. One from the Germans, one from a time when Reagan put up a thing wanting to unite the world. They created I think it was called Solar Warden, I think. And then another one which was based on huge corporations just wanting to go off and mine planets and stuff. So like I can't remember the name of it. And there's another one. Yeah, there's about 6 that are kind of talked about. Yeah, the moon.
So that's got to be at least a few more.
Yeah. In this book, there's this, Corey Good in the last story. There's this guy he claims that he was he was trained by some kind of governmental thing to be a kind of a empath to dialogue with these, and he was like sent to Mars, and then towards the end of his kind of time, he was age regressed through some technology, and then put through time travel back to the time before he started his work.
Oh, ain't that some shit?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It's like, wait a minute, how many lives have I led, and then they just rewound me, you know?
But so what he was saying is that up on the moon, when they landed on the moon, there was a period where the footage cut out for like 10 minutes or so, and in that time, the idea that they saw some craft that was basically telling them to get off the moon. And so they stopped it.
Well, that shouldn't surprise anyone listening to this, at least to the extent that you don't even need to believe in there being like vastly more sophisticated parallel civilizations living on this earth to admit that there is without any question evidence of secret space programs. Because I know the people out at Synergia Ranch in New Mexico, they were the ones that built Biosphere 2 in Arizona back in the 90s, where it was a prototype Mars base that contained a coral reef and a rainforest and living soil and all this. It contained all 5 major ecosystems. It had lungs, and the building, they grew all their own food and stuff, and it was an outgrowth of a joint international secret space research project between the United States and Russia in the 70s. John Allen, the guy that invented Biosphere, was actually invited to build it in Siberia and chose America instead because he was born American. But he took me around, and he's like 90 now, and he took me around his office, and he's got a map. First of all, he's got pictures of, like, in the height of the Cold War, it's NASA and the CCCP, the cosmonaut force, whatever, I forget what they were called, and they're like hanging out, and it's like the whole thing was a front that was used to puff up the military-industrial complex, while behind the curtain both countries were totally buddy-buddy.
Yeah, right.
And there's a map in his office that's a geological and geographical map of Mars from the 70s that has never been released. That is, like, now you could probably find a map like this online, because we've, sent in more recent surveys. But we had this completely sophisticated, like as sophisticated a map of the geology of Mars as we did of Earth as of like 1979. Whoa. And there's just like, but I asked him, so do you think that there are secret bases on Mars? And he was like, no, because my experience of bureaucracy is that these people don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. Like, we could not get it together, But I was like, but then there's like Arthur C. Clarke's third law, or no, not the third law, the first law, where he says, if an elderly distinguished scientist tells you something's impossible, he's probably wrong. So I take his negation as like, evidence that there probably are Mars bases at this point.
Jump rooms.
Jump rooms. Yeah. Teleportation. Why not? I mean, if we can send a cell phone signal instantaneously through space, why not? Why not Brundle fly that shit? I mean, if you get post-traumatic stress disorder coming back from Iraq, like, what happens to the people who come back from Mars?
Well, apparently they get their minds wiped and from the
yuck. So I was explaining to you earlier that this whole podcast is sort of based on a premise of recognizing that this will probably be a very important moment historically, like this period that we're living through, if for no other reason than we're recording more and more and more all the time, to the point that Kevin Kelly, in his latest book, The Inevitable, Understanding 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future, says one of those forces is recording and the ability to play back. You know, he says if you look at early film, that early film was only experienced once. And then we invented the VHS. And then it changed the way that we made movies, because the movies suddenly were something that people could watch over and over and over and pause and rewind. And television, you know, you could never, you know, if you didn't see it when the show was on, you weren't going to see it again.
Right.
But now, all of our video media is designed from the start to be watched over and over. Yeah. So we're getting to a point now where this is increasingly the case with everything in our lives, with our, like, you know, the Facebook timeline, and like being able to search your email history, and like the more cameras we put in public spaces, the easier it's going to get to be to sit on a park bench with your Microsoft HoloLens or whatever and rewind the day, you know, and like go back and be like, oh, I wonder who was sitting on this bench at 8 a.m. So there's this, it feels to me like maybe one of the preoccupations of citizens of the future, once we've been freed from wage slavery over Unity and artificial intelligence, is that we all become digital archaeologists and we all mine the meaning of all of this data pollution that we've created. And so I'm curious how you imagine that this moment will be remembered or understood, or like what won't necessarily be immediately obvious is something that you might want to communicate to that future self that includes but also transcends you.
Wow.
That was a good question.
That was a good question.
I mean, do you ever think about how the future is going to look back on this? I mean, that's the simpler version.
Really, I guess. No. I will from now on. Yeah.
Because, I mean, you and your friends sound like you're kind of in the position of being remembered in that, like the way that we remember Buckminster Fuller now, or something. You know, the way that we remember Tesla. You know, that there's like these waves of Renaissance kind of, you know, holistic creativity.
Wow. I think I know.
That's fine. Yeah. We could always do a follow-up over Skype, and we'll get a much cleaner recording.
Yeah. Give me some homework.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for the future?
No, not really. Pretty present. Excited to get back.
Right on, man. Well, dude, it's an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And we absolutely, like, I would be remiss not to mention that Mark is just one of my favorite painters, an absolutely amazing artist whose work has a sensitivity to it that I find rare even amongst the sacred feminine obsessed visionary art movement. That there's something very like shapely and gentle about your work, even in its like flaming intensity. You know, so please, folks, go check his stuff out. What is your website for listeners?
My website, I'm still working on it, but it's Somnio8.com.
It's
Somnio, which means in Latin I dream, and then 8 for infinity. So I dream infinitely.
So you do. Right on, man. Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Got a lot more to learn. The work is not done here, and we may not ever figure it out. We probably won't figure it out.